I want to discuss about the use of AI for academic publishings. I think it's just part of my reflections, insights throughout, journal publications, as well as because I'm also managing journal, which is Global South Review, and I want to open up these discussions about how should we positioning the use of AI in academic publishing. Should it be okay? Should it be illegal to use it? What will be the consequence? What can we do or what we can't do? Well, of course, I'll share my point based on my experience as versus the journal editors, as well as an experience as the authors from the Global South scholars. I would say, I think I just want to share like a stories. It was came up when I recently come up into one of journal that I think has quite extensive rules and guidelines for the use of AI, which is the Journal of Clean Reproductions. I think first of all, I want to appreciate the journal, because this journal, I think I've been following this journal since 7 to 10 years ago, and I feel like this journal has been also, in terms of their management, has been also developing. And for example, when the ChatGPT were first introduced in 2020 or 2021, this journal, and I think maybe also some other journal as well, introduced transparency policy for the use of AI. So they say that, well, it's okay if you want to, it's just like, in a mundane language, the rules say that it is okay if you want to use ChatGPT or other AI tools for your writings in manuscript, but you need to mention, you need to explicitly tell us or explain how do you use these AI tools. For example, whether you use it for language editing, or do you also use it for data collections or data analysis, and so on, which I think I appreciate at that time, because I remember the moment. I remember that it was a lot of chaos, controversies in this use of AI, and this policy or these rules encourage authors to be transparent. It's not encouraging, and I think in the sense that's also great, because then it's not up to the journals themselves to decide these norms or the ethics, but then the norm itself is transparency. But then quite recently, I also look at the rules in the journals, and I found there is more updates to the use of AI guidelines, and a very, very extensive update. For example, they have guidelines for authors as well as for reviewers on the use of AI, which I think it's also a sign of how the journal itself has developed themselves from the development of AI. For example, for the reviewers, they explicitly forbid reviewers to upload the manuscript that they review in the AI tools, because then it will violate the somewhat privacy of the authors, because by uploading it to the AI, this means that we give the reviewer give access of pre-published data or pre-published writings or papers. Then I think what I appreciate that it gives a lot of ethical considerations on what can be the worst consequence of the use of AI, like for example violations of privacy violations, of copyrights violations, of sensitive personal data, because the AI doesn't, at the moment, doesn't really have, is still using this personal data in their operations. And I think, but I think what I somewhat intrigued or a bit of critical, there is one line for the author's guideline in the journal that says, well, for you authors, you should also not using generative AI, even though it is for language editing, because overall the idea of publication, academic publications, is peer review. So writings in English, perfecting your language is also part of it. If I'm not mistaken, that will be the guideline for authors. This part for me as a Global South scholars is a bit intriguing, because it's also a sign of normalizing the use of English, it to become more superior. Like the way I see it, that if you want to become scholars or global scholars, you need to be very well spoken in English. That's I think the implicit message from this guideline, which I personally disagree to it, because I found that this is still part of colonizations of knowledge. Like, why, like, if you want to become scholars, you want to contribute to the global knowledge productions, you need to submit or subjugate it into one language, which is the majority language. And what about other scholars who don't speak English as their native, or the first language, for example? What about second? What about those scholars who use English as a second foreign language, for example? It doesn't have any, inclusive criteria. If we cannot, if we forbid, or if we think that if we require any scholars to publish their work should have well written or should have well knowledge in English. But then of course you say, well, there is a language editor, why don't you submit to language editor? Some journals, for example, has the service for language editor, which also very normal to use. And yes, that's also, I think I also use it as a service. I use language editor. But we cannot also forget that the language editor also has a very expensive service fee. I would say why it's very expensive in compared to the standard of Global South scholars. For example, Indonesia, to have a language editor services, we need to have around 5 to 10 million in the Indonesian rupiah, or around, let's say, 500 to 1,000 dollars. Yeah, that's really depend on numbers of word, the quality of the language, and so on. Which I think, if compared to the wage of scholars, academic scholars in Indonesia, it's almost equals to their 1 month salaries, basic salaries. I have another video discussing about these basic salaries. I will put it in the bottom link. But then the idea is that it is expensive for Global South scholars to afford academic language editors. And what they do, that's why I would say it's a matter of privilege. Those who can publish in international journal which good or well written English articles, mostly either they can afford this language editor, which means they have higher income, whether it is from their academic professions. Perhaps they're already professor, which has more higher income than a regular lecturer, or perhaps they also have additional income for becoming having official positions, for example, or having other project, for example. The idea is they have more money and they can afford it, but it doesn't mean that all scholars or all Global South scholars can afford these language editors, or those who don't need language editor, for example, they already well spoken in English. This also quite a matter of privilege, because mostly those who are already well spoken in English are educated in international ecosystems curriculum. Like, for example, they go to international elementary school, they go to private schools, for example. And again, then it is a matter of privilege. So I, for example, interact with some scholars who are using these AI tools for language editing, and they found that these AI tools for language editing are very helpful to convey their message, because it's not only about translating Indonesian language to English, but it's also about delivering your idea, your main idea you have in your mind, into a language that others can understand. And between Indonesian language and English language, they have different logics. Like, for example, there is no sort of like gendered language in Indonesian language, but there are still some gendered language in English, for example. And in terms of time orientation, past, future, and present tense, for example, there is no difference in Indonesian language. So then that really, that's really influence way of thinking for the scholars, which I would say that for Indonesian scholars, for example, if they want to write in English, in a very well written English, and convey their message, they need to like switch logic and think like a foreigners, things like the English, for example. So in this sense, I'm a bit of a pessimistic if we want to forbid the use of AI, even if it is used for language editing. I think it will, somehow, I want to say, it will perpetuating the exclusive criteria to become a global scholars. And unless there is subsidies, for example, unless there is free language editing from the journal itself for these Global South scholars, then I think the use of AI tools for language editing should be considered eligible for academic publishing, with, of course, some oversight from the authors, and making sure, for example, that the accuracy of the data and the analysis is accountable. So I think that's some of thoughts that I have in mind for this issues. But I'm really open if you have other idea, you also wants to challenge this use of AI, or you want to also add other arguments why we should not use AI for academic publishing. Thank you so much for listening.